Welcome. This is the final Wide Days panel of the day, which is titled Mind Your Language. And our guests have one thing in common. In the course of their careers in music, they've traveled extensively and worked with dozens of people in dozens of countries. Over the next 55 minutes, they're going to share their insights, experiences, and stories. And feel free to post your own questions or experiences into the chat. My name's Olaf Furniss. You will probably be wondering how I'm able to appear in this panel and the one running at the same time. The answer is simple. My DNA was cloned last week. It was split and they made two of me to be able to run two panels at once. That's one version. The other version is that I pre-recorded the Soma Local Heroes one on Friday last week in Glasgow, but I am wearing the same shirt. I'm actually wearing the same trousers as well, but you can't see that. But they have been washed in the meantime. I apologize that you're getting me again. Originally, it was meant to be Machine Woman, who did an amazing panel last year. Unfortunately, she had to pull out, so I jumped in at very short notice. So that's why I don't have a nice sort of plain backdrop like most of our speakers, but such is life, needs must. So this panel was really inspired by one that a talk that I saw at Sandbox, the Excellent Music Ally event, and it was dealing with how cultural norms vary and the different sensitivities around doing business in different countries. And so I thought we'll pull together some very cultured and well-traveled individuals and get them to give us some of their insights and experiences, and of course, some of their tips. So I'd like to begin with asking each panelist to introduce themselves. I'll leave you till last, Adam, because I appreciate that it's still early in the morning where you are. You're 8 hours behind us and 9 hours behind Peter, in fact. So as Peter's been awake the longest, I'm going to ask Peter to do an introduction to himself.
Hello there. Yes, I'm Peter Astedt, and I am from Sweden. I'm sitting in Sweden right now on an island, which I haven't left for 1.5 years, it seems like. Other than that, I usually travel quite much. I've been speaking on 65 conferences around the world. I think I've been spoken on every continent right now in the world, but I'm not as travel experienced as Adam, as you will find out. Adam is the mastermind of traveling. And I run a showcase festival called Future Echoes in Sweden. I also run management. I do a lot of sync placements. I work for Cashbox Radio. I have my own radio station. I have a column in Cashbox Magazine and in Record World. So that's a little bit about me, at least.
Thank you. Lindsey, would you like to go next?
Sure thing. It's not as early as it is over on the West Coast, Adam, but I'm in New York, so it's still the morning here technically, but happy to be here. I've been tour managing for the last almost 7 years now. I am born and raised in Rhode Island, in the United States. It is not part of New York, just to clarify. We get that a lot, but it is not. It's about a couple hundred miles away. But in Rhode Island, I had a co-working and a production space for local musicians in and around New England. And then as I got more involved in the touring world, I've been fortunate enough to tour with acts both nationally and internationally. And for the first 5 or so years of my career, I was focused in the hip hop realm. So definitely have a lot to speak about when it comes to diversity in touring and diversity across the board, and excited to share those experiences with all of you.
Thanks very much. Amanda, welcome. Could you introduce yourself, please?
So I'm Amanda Freeman. I run a musical PR company called Freeman PR. I've been doing this job for 30 plus years, and over the years I have headed up the press office at Island Records. I've been the tour publicist for U2 on 2 world tours. I've worked with bands from Blur, Smashing Pumpkins, Keith Richards, PJ Harvey. Started my own company in 2007, And my roster is pretty diverse. I'm currently working with an artist from Australia, a couple from the States, Norwegian. I've worked with quite a few Scandinavian artists, actually, and it really straddles every kind of musical genre. And I think that's about it from me.
Wonderful. Adam, I've given you an extra 5 minutes to sort of acclimatize. Peter's already given you half an introduction, but please provide us with the other half.
I'd love 5 minutes more, Olaf, if you don't mind. No, I'm kidding. So just to show you everywhere I've been in the world, that's my magnet wall, and that's every country I've been in the world. So I'm up to 83. So that's what that is. So yeah, I love to travel, and that's how I know Peter. That's how I know Olaf. I run the Planetary group in Los Angeles. We're celebrating our 25th year this year, and we love working with overseas artists, and so that's why I travel so much, looking for artists that are looking to get into the U.S. marketplace. We run a PR firm, doing lots of press and lots of radio. We're most known for radio, but we have a full PR team as well. We do a lot of college radio, specialist radio, non-commercial NPR, commercial specialty radio, and like I said, lots of online PR and marketing. And we introduced countless artists from overseas, Courtney Barnett, and we introduced Portugal the Man here. They're not overseas, but stuff like that. We work with new artists, introducing them into the U.S. marketplace. That's what we do.
So I'd like to start with, to set the tone and give people a reason to carry on watching, with what each of you would regard as perhaps the worst case of cultural misunderstanding on your part you've had doing business in another country or working with someone from abroad. And it'd also be really good to know if the situation was resolved, and if so, how you managed to do that. So Adam, would you like to start on that one?
In terms of, I'm trying to think of a horror story. I'm not sure if I can think of a horror story of a specific act that came over and was a problem. I mean, I'll always say there are differences. There are bands, that when you're coming to the U.S. from overseas, you don't often realize how large the U.S. is and how hard it is here, and
I would say with this quickly, this is the worst one that where have you put your foot in it, or what's been the worst one for you in terms of a cultural faux pas?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a disaster. I'm sure something will come to me, but I will say that I had a band from Australia. They love to swear in Australia. And, I had an album we were promoting to radio, and it just never occurred to me to make sure that they didn't swear on every single song of the album. And, the album arrives, I've got 12 tracks, and none of them, I can't promote anyone on the radio because they've got the F-bomb in each song. And I'm sitting on 500 copies of a CD that I meant to send out to radio that are literally worthless because I'd forgotten to explain to them, to Australians, because I just wasn't used to this fact that someone would put a record out where every single song would have the F-bomb in it, So I mean that was a problem. We had to obviously go in the studio and do edits and repress the CDs or whatever. But I can't really think of like a really putting my foot in it moment. There's lots of little cultural problems where an artist is coming over to the U.S. and they just can't handle the length of travel between cities, you can tour the UK and sleep in your own bed, for half of the dates, right? Because the distances aren't very far. But, in the US, you're going to drive, 6 or 8 hours between each show on a regular basis. And a lot of bands just can't handle that. And that kind of, freaks them out. But I can't think of that one, oh my God moment of I've really stepped in it.
So, Lindsey, you've been a tour manager in lots of places. I mean, have you ever? Are there any places where you went for the first time and someone had to take you aside and go, you know what, that's not very acceptable here, or you're not allowed to do that, or it's frowned upon.
I think a lot of the times I was having acts that were coming to the US and I was their tour manager. I've tour managed for a couple of K-pop acts. I've tour managed for quite a few bands coming from the UK. And Adam, like you were saying, there was a couple of acts that were used to being in their own beds. And so when we're driving, 6, 8, sometimes 10 hours a day, depending on the routing, especially on the tours where you're driving yourself and you're not fortunate enough to have a bus, they couldn't hang. Everyone's falling asleep. Spend a lot of time, listening to podcasts or listening to music, trying to stay awake while everyone was sleeping in the van. But I think what was interesting in terms of like just cultural things, a lot of that happened in the US. And for me, having worked in hip hop for so long, a lot of the first acts that I went out on the road with, almost the entire crew were all Black men. And for me to show up as the little white girl, especially in the middle of the United States, I can go into any hotel, I can check in, I can have a nice conversation with the concierge at the front desk, and we can talk about, favorite restaurants and bars and coffee shops and whatever. And then all of a sudden I've got, the whole crew comes off the bus and it's a dozen Black men in the lobby. And the woman goes from asking for, oh, sweetie, do you need anything, to, do you need help getting away from them? And those sort of cultural exchanges are, if we're being honest, it's just pretty blatant racism. Those are the things that I think are disappointing, and the reason why people do need to travel more to understand that there's such a large array of people and differences all across the world. And obviously somebody like Adam, who's been to 80 plus countries, obviously knows that. So I think if we can get more people out of their comfort zones and into different arenas, we'll have a better shot at it.
Now, Peter, I'm hoping that you can give an answer to this question, as I'm really keen to have it, because I think that, Lindsey raises some really important points, which we'll come to, and it's around awareness as well. But I think that, more specifically with this, there are situations where, I find myself, for example, to give you an example, where, working a lot with partnerships in Spain where, I was told stuff was going to happen. And when it didn't happen and I was about to board a flight and I still didn't even know if I had my passes for the awards show that we were the media partner with, I kind of read them the riot act. And this didn't go down very well at all. I did get my passes, but apparently it was frowned upon that someone that's about to board a flight and the media partner's about to board a flight and their passes aren't there and no one's bothered their arse to sort it out. Getting pissed off about that apparently is not the done thing, but it is something where I think in hindsight, I'd probably have handled it differently, and that I'd have kind of got that included well early and made it much more explicit that, we expect our passes to be there or to collect them at the hotel. Have you got any examples of sort of anything like that where, you've kind of learned the hard way around sort of certain cultural sensitivities?
Yeah, there's one that is a famous thing that I did. I did business with Japan. And we had a band that a Japanese company is going to sign. And we had this conversation on the phone. Internet was there, but it was not so common that you did it. And everything we asked for, they said yes. It was more or less, if I said like, we want to play on the Tokyo Dome, they would say yes. And in the end of it, we started to be more or less like, they're saying yes to everything. There's something wrong here. So we started to ask for things that was totally out of reach, and they still said yes. And we couldn't get it, and we were almost like going to Japan to do all this stuff when a friend of mine told that his son was actually working and doing things in Japan, and he explained to me that more or less like the Japanese says yes, it doesn't mean that it is yes. It means more like, yes, I understand you, but I don't agree with you. So here we have the negotiation went back to zero, more or less, because we didn't know really what they had agreed on. So we didn't know if it was a show or if there was a tour, if there is even a deal in the beginning of it. So later on, when I actually went to Japan, I hired this guy He lives in Japan, he's a career, he's kind of a big artist, even though he's from Sweden. And the dealing went 100% faster because he told us in Swedish the whole time. It's like, right now you should not enter the elevator because the big boss goes in first. Right now, don't start to eat. You have to wait for the boss of the record labels to start eating before the other. All these small things that made everything, and suddenly we made deals, 10 times faster than normal, because the Japanese people understands. They have like the forgive you because you're Westerner, but if you know the rules and actually play by them, it goes much faster. Same thing when I did it in Africa. I mean, I had my, thinking like the people there, they didn't have the equipment or anything like that. And we went to a studio outside in Nairobi. And I thought that, okay, now I'm going to see a studio that is like, from the 70s or old gears and just went in there and they had the highest gear. I never seen such good equipped studio in Sweden even. And that's the thing that you're thinking, like, this Africa, it's poor, it should not work. But they have these kind of things, and you have to think twice always when you're somewhere. They have things that's much better than you think they have.
So, try to avoid preconceptions. And, it's interesting. I think that's a really good piece of advice. And it's also interesting that you mentioned Japan, because the one thing I've not been, but the one thing I've heard from numerous people is the business card etiquette, which always makes me think of American Psycho as well. But this idea that, here someone hands you a business card and you might stick it in your wallet and then later use it for a roach or something. But, over there, the etiquette is to really sort of study it and scrutinize it to, show your interest. And
that is actually one of the horror stories, not by me, but my former boss on Virgin. And they had some Japanese businessmen over, and they handed the business cards, and everybody's just throwing them away almost. And one of the bosses was actually picking his teeth with the card. Let's say the deal never went off.
I mean, you have to take the card with both hands, and you have to look at it and study it and look at them and then look at the card and then back at them, and you treat it as it's almost like a gift. I mean, I've had meetings in Japan where they not only give, and Korea for that matter, not only give you the card, but they also give you a special gift. A small little gift is very common to bring to a business meeting, and they will oftentimes. I've got several business card holders from Asian companies that I've met with. The other thing is you're going to have to, if you're doing business in Asia, you have to drink. It just it goes hand in hand. Like, you will have to drink, which is not going to, I mean, this is a Scottish audience, so I don't think it's going to be a problem, but it will be more than beer. You will have to drink. You have to be willing to get to know the person before actually doing a deal. You can't come right out and just dive right in and start talking bullet points of the deal. You have to get to know them and almost be willing to lose a little face in front of them too by having a few drinks. I especially found that in China, that you have to kind of get drunk with them and go do karaoke or something before you can do a deal.
Amanda, if you've toured the world with U2, I mean, I could imagine that could be pretty injurious to your health if you're having to get hosed up with, like, on a tour of Asia with every single person you're doing business with. But how, have you had any situations like what Peter described, or have there been any, in Asia or in any other parts of the world where you've kind of learned the hard way? Well,
certainly I'll reiterate what Peter said. I mean, it is a very polite society. Everything is very rigid in terms of the rules. I remember working with obviously one of my jobs was escorting photographers into the photo pit. And, for the first 3 numbers of the show. And generally, they can roam around, they can walk wherever they like within that area. However, the Japanese photographers wanted to be literally at the back of the stadium on ladders with their cameras, wanted to know exactly how long each song lasted. Everything had to be done in, very specific detail, which was something that I was not used to. And I think another lesson I learned was when we flew in from South Africa on the Pop Mart tour, we literally arrived, it was a long flight, but the record company had invited us out for dinner, which obviously we all went to and were happy to go along to. However, typically one assumes that the host will bring an end to the meal. And at the back of my mind was the fact that, I had to go and meet the band at about 5 o'clock in the morning at the airport, because typically we did a press conference with whatever media was there. And the meal went on and it went on and it went on. And obviously, as you say, a lot of drinking involved. And somebody tipped me off and said, look, actually, it's down to the guest to kind of bring an end to the meal. So finally, that's what happened, because otherwise, I mean, God knows what time we would have got out of that restaurant.
What time did you leave?
I can't remember now. It was a long time ago now. But actually, another story I was thinking of when I first saw that question was when, again, on the same tour, I mean, we're going back 20 years ago now. It wasn't a faux pas I made, but I'd say it was a faux pas that perhaps one of the local media made. And again, we were in the photo pit. We were in Thessalonica in Greece. And because of the way U2 played, there was always a walkway, and photographers were welcome to walk along that walkway, but not get onto the small platform because it disturbed the view of the audience. And there was one particular photographer, that Greek photographer, that obviously didn't like what I was saying. And I told him multiple times to get down, and he ended up physically assaulting me. And I had to kind of cry for help on the radio, the walkie-talkie. And was fortunately rescued by Adam Clayton, security guy, who swiftly walked this guy out of the venue. And I'm not entirely sure what happened to his cameras, but I don't think he went home with them, put it that way.
Well, it's a good cultural lesson for the photographer by the signs of it as well.
Whether it was because he didn't like taking instruction from a woman, I'm not sure, but yeah.
And I think that there's obviously, I covered the whole Western European music market for a trade magazine. I was the news editor, so we were, we had correspondence about a dozen different countries, but I think that covered 15 in total. And I think that what we learned there was a lot about idiosyncrasies in different countries. So if you could forget getting anyone in Norway for in the afternoon in July, because they were all hanging out in their summer houses and everyone was working part-time. As we found out, trying to pull together a Dutch focus at Wide Days, pretty much the entire Netherlands goes on holiday at this time of year. We still managed to find a few that joined us from Spain or from other exotic locations, but it is something where we began to, also realize that if there's a Thursday holiday in Spain, or they'll take the Friday off as well and run it into 4 days. You learn about religious holidays and all sorts of things like that. But on top of that, we kind of discovered that there was no singles market in Spain, for example. I mean, back in the days when people still bought physical singles. So even though Flat Eric, Mr. Wazzo, that you might remember from the Levi's ad, was one of the best ever selling records in Spain, and I sort of tipped off the record company, I only have half a gold disc because no one ever managed to sell enough singles to get a gold disc. So I'm kind of interested in your experiences around, around those sort of, I guess, market idiosyncrasies. I think it's probably something that, you might have picked up in different, dealing with different countries, or, in your different roles. But, and I appreciate. I'm going to come on to one about touring after this, Lindsey. If you haven't been on that side of the music industry fence, but Peter, I mean, you're from Sweden. It's got an absolutely enormous streaming market. It's probably one of the first where streaming really took off. Obviously, home of Spotify as well. I mean, what would you say was some of the things that people should be aware of if they're planning a global release campaign?
Yeah, you need to check out. Before it was like Sweden was a lot. I mean, I had so many conversations with bands come up here saying, yeah, we're gonna sell some CDs and some vinyls, and it's like, no, you won't, because everything, it has to be on Spotify, because Spotify owns 98% of the market. So here it's kind of weird. At the same time, you have the same trouble with the Swedish band. They're like, yeah, we're on Spotify. Yeah, but you're entering another territory like Korea, where you have Melon or someone else, and your music is not presentable or not available in that area. So one of the things when you're doing an international release is to really cover up and see that your distributors actually covers the right shops and the right places. And on top of that, you need also have the context inside these shops, so it actually is presented in the right way. So sometimes when we release here, I don't even, if the song's not going to get into Asia, might not pay attention to that area or South America. But if the release going to go there, then I have to check each territory. That's why also a full release can take almost 2 years to make, because it's so much difference into this different territories. I mean, if you go to South America, it's a lot of YouTube. And the videos has to be there and everything like that. When it comes to Asia, physical products are still there. I mean, they still have buses going around in Tokyo screaming out that you should buy the CD. And if you're going down to Africa, then it's more the streaming is going there. But and then it's different marketing tools. Sometimes radio is very important. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's bloggers important. Sometimes it's not. It's each territory is different. That's the main problem.
And when you say shops, do you generally mean streaming services, getting it into the sort of the big streaming services in the different countries?
Yeah, I mean it is. I mean, I had a worldwide hit with he's a strange guy. He's singing songs about diseases, and he's a doctor from the beginning, and suddenly he got this boom in Korea. The song was not there, but we have the distribution service to Korea. So what I had to go back to the distributor and check with them, why is it not up in Korea? Because it's big on YouTube there and they want it on Melon. And suddenly it shows out that, yeah, every release we're doing from here, it actually takes 6 months to go through in Korea because they have to translate everything. It's no bad words in there or something like that. And suddenly we found a way to speed up the process so it goes for 48 hours. And next time we're releasing in Korea, sure, I know exactly what to do and how to promote that, because it was so much trouble. And that was just happened by chance. So there you go.
Amanda, have you got any comparable stories around promotion and doing global PR, or even like the local idiosyncrasies in terms of how journalists work, in terms of how media works, and even perhaps some local media etiquette?
I can remember actually going back to U2's Elevation tour, and they were launching it in a restaurant that was co-owned by, I think, Bono, Johnny Depp, Mick Hucknall, can't remember the other one. Anyway, it was a big deal, and we'd all flown in, ready to do the showcase that night. We had international media coming in, and the French took a 2-hour lunch break, which rather threw us all, actually. On top of that, I would say if artists are coming to the UK, I worked with a French artist called Jane, actually, quite recently, who was a very big deal across Europe. I think it's making it clear to them that if they are an unknown in the UK, then you're probably going to have to work on a lower level. You're going to need to build things up. You might be asked to do press that you wouldn't necessarily do in your own territory, and also very worthwhile putting some if you're doing posts on social media, making sure it's in the local language, because if somebody hears your track on Six Music and inevitably Googles you or looks for you on Twitter or whatever, then, they want to be able to understand what they're reading. So a few weeks maybe ahead of a tour, ahead of an album coming out, that kind of thing, obviously retweeting any posts from UK sites, etc.
It's an interesting point, this, actually, because I guess that, with English being, very much a music industry language, there's quite, and the Western Europe and Northern Europe, this assumption that everyone does speak English, but it's not always the case, and there are territories like France and Spain where people just don't necessarily speak English. And I mean, are there any places that you find that to particularly be the case, or maybe in Eastern Europe where people are more likely to speak Russian as their second language, or indeed anywhere else in bigger countries, or certain places where you're better off perhaps knowing French than you are English, and is it advisable to either, if you're touring, to have an interpreter, or to as you say, have things translated in advance?
I mean, I'm going back away now, but when I was touring with U2, one of my many jobs was having to translate the reviews from the previous night's papers. I mean, obviously, it was the very early days of online, so mostly things were in print. And for me, it was a major task to get somebody to help me translate these reviews. So I was making friends with anyone I could in the hotel, in terms of even getting a waiter to sit down and translate the reviews for me. Obviously, these days, I imagine we have Google Translate, and it's a whole lot easier. I mean, from a band's point of view, I have to say I've not been in a position where they have to particularly master another language, I would say. I mean, I think it's always helpful if they can, they have a few key phrases that they can use on stage. But I mean, in terms of generally, certainly in Japan, we had an interpreter with us that was absolutely crucial. Most other countries we went to, people's English was good enough, which was very lucky for us.
I mean, that I'll kind of come on to something that just occurred to me about local sensitivities and getting the country or the nation right where you are. So do remind me of that if I forget, because obviously I'm in Scotland. But it's I think before that, I mean, Adam, and you're promoting within the US, but I mean, are there any things that are there a couple of things that you would say were really good advice for anyone from outside the US that might differ drastically from their own countries in terms of releasing and promotion?
Well, like I was saying earlier, I mean, definitely knowing, a lot of people just don't realize that on the radio front, that you can't swear in America, right? So that's surprises people, especially since we're land of hip hop and constant swearing, and growing up with Spotify and online and video that's full of swearing or whatever. But radio, you can't, and so you have to make sure your material is appropriate for radio. So that throws a lot of people off. Going back to kind of some other things in terms of overseas. I mean, I always tell folks, people always want to hire me or get a recommendation for, we want to promote to Europe. It's like, no, you can't do that. You've got to think of territories. You've got to have someone in each market, right? You can't hire someone to do Asia. You've got to hire someone for Japan, and someone for GSA in Europe, someone for the UK, someone for France, because it's also different, and you have to be in different languages, like people were mentioning. Another thing to know also is what are the alcohol customs, in a market. Like, I did some shows in India, in Hyderabad area. It's a very Muslim part of India. Can't have any booze on stage. The performers can't be seen with booze. So you have to have that conversation with the artist. I had a band, we were touring in China, and they were all African American, and I had to have a conversation with the band before we got to China about a certain word that they were going to hear a lot in China, which did not mean what it meant in the US, which was a very bad racial slur, but that was a very common but type of word in conversation in China, awkward conversation, all those type of things.
That's such a good example as well, the linguistic ones, because I think that that's from my own experience. I mean, I covered the Spanish market, as I mentioned, and I remember one of the sub-editors saying to him, with año, which means year, you have to have a little squiggle over the end. It's a different letter, and he was really dismissive. And I was like, well, the reason you need to do that is because if you don't have that little squiggle over the end, it says ano, which means anus, not year. So pay attention. After that, he put in every single accent and enya that I ever had in a spelling. So I think Adam's point brings me nicely onto you, Lindsey, and I think that as a seasoned tour manager, what kind of things have you encountered that where those kind of local customs need to be taken into consideration? Have there been any incidents with artists perhaps not really understanding that, or you having to take them aside and say, actually, this is gonna offend people, or it's gonna piss them off? I'm sure you've got loads, but I'll let you pick your favorites.
Totally. Yeah, I think the biggest thing that comes to mind is working with a lot of acts just across the board that aren't from the US, is the idea of time. And like, there's some European countries that are very timely and very organized, but a lot of South American artists that I've worked with, and some European artists that I've worked with from different areas, like, I always get in the habit, I have to tell them at least 30 minutes, if not the full hour, in advance of when we need to be to a place, because there's just no concept of time. We're just in different realms in that regard. And I think more so, going back to an earlier point, like, I worked with a K-pop artist who had been part of one of the humongous big K-pop groups over in Korea, and then she came to the US to do her own independent career. And I think that was the biggest eye-opening thing for her, was she went from touring humongous stadiums and having, the cream of the crop, tippity top experience when she would walk into a room, to going to playing more House of Blues sized venues. Those are 1,000, 2,000 cap rooms. And so to reconcile with that internally, I think may have been a little bit difficult for her. But it was also, I think, jarring for some of the promoters as well, because she came from Korea. She came from this huge band. I mean, she had 6 million plus social media followers. So I think a lot of the agents and booking agents in particular in the States that booked her were thinking that she was going to sell out every show. But obviously, having a fan base in anywhere in Asia, no matter how high it is, that doesn't mean that it's going to translate into butts and seats here in the US.
I mean, it sounds like that also involves managing the expectations of the artist client, doesn't it? I mean, how do you go about broaching this? Because what you're touching on is something that I witnessed back in the late '90s, when a lot of Latin American stars like Enrique Iglesias and Shakira, Ricky Martin, they were breaking through, but they really they were playing huge places in Latin America, but then they were going to doing little sort of showcases and much smaller gigs. And Britain doesn't enjoy the best reputation for what it offers artists on those sort of lower capacity venues. And I could imagine there's a conversation to be had to say, well, yeah, if they're feeding you, you should be grateful, sort of thing. I mean, how do you explain that to them, and how do you manage those expectations in those situations?
Totally. Yeah, I think it was just an ongoing conversation, like, the entire time that we were on that tour. And a lot of the other folks who were on that tour were more, there was one that came from touring the world with Robin Thicke, and he had very, very high expectations, but he had adjusted accordingly. But for the artist in particular, I think it was funny to kind of sit down and be like, hey dude, let's have this conversation. I understand that normally, for you're showing up, you're getting whatever you wanted, but now you've kind of honestly been knocked down a few rungs, and you're establishing yourself independently, and that work needs to be done. It doesn't necessarily translate over. And it was a conversation that we just had to have probably half a dozen times throughout the tour, just to manage that. And if I had known in advance, I probably would have started the conversation earlier to really set the tone. But you got to roll with the punches, especially on tour.
A friend of mine, Martin Atkins, wrote an amazing book called Tour Smart about touring the US, with a whole lot of practical tips and where you should, how you basically survive touring the US. And I think it's particularly poignant for artists from outside the States who don't quite grasp how it all fits together. But I'm really interested in, Amanda or Peter, you've got any insights in, you know, with Europe? I can remember hosting a panel where someone was saying, look, you know, if you're touring mainland Europe, not the UK, then, and you're doing it on various countries, you know, hire your splitter in Belgium or Germany or something, you know, or then if you're going on to Scandinavia, then buy all your beer in Germany or Denmark, because it's going to be much more expensive in Sweden and even worse, of course, in Norway. But, you know, get your merch made in this place, or, you know, do something there, you know, or have have some CDs pressed there. Peter, what, you know, and Amanda, have you got any tips on European touring in that regard?
It depends on there are things inside which also comes sometimes with perceptions and stuff like that. And for example, people always, all my bands is, every time I said we're going to Eastern Europe, they think that it's going to be like in the 80s. It's like a poor area with the poor people and things like that. Then what they don't realize is that many of the gig places in Eastern Europe nowadays has better technology and better gears than most of the clubs in Germany. Also that Germany has a certain thing, and you work in Germany, it's Germany, but it's the same thing. It's working in Sweden, it's in Sweden. It's not the same as Finland, and it's not the same in Norway, and it's not the same in Denmark. So sometimes you have to, prepare them something that, each country is different. France is different, and Spain is different. And most of the times I'm taking actually people from each country and talk to them and say, what should we do? I mean, just one thing that Boyan told me, that yes, if you're in Bulgaria, you throw napkins, and if you like the band, you throw napkins. The more napkins you throw, the better it is. Stuff like that is just like to prepare the band is like, they will throw napkins at you, was one of the things we did for that tour. Another thing that we did is also sell. Before, when I was touring in my younger days, everybody was asking how much booze you can get in every country. Now all the artists are asking how is the cell, you know, are we getting cell connection like internet? Because if we have toured Canada, for example, if you're up in North Canada, you have no cell reception for days, and that can make a new artist totally crazy. I learned over the years.
And I mean, Amanda, your experience, are the types of merch, are there merch idiosyncrasies in different countries? I mean, are you, you know, I was thinking about the napkins, but, you know, or have you encountered any unusual ways of audiences expressing their appreciation? I mean, I remember, I don't know why, but I saw an interview with Samantha Fox about 20 odd years ago, and she was really big in India way after her career and everywhere else had sort of dwindled. And she said that, you know, guys would throw their turbans on stage as a mark of appreciation. Have you encountered any things like that? And are there, you know, and then second question, are there any types of merch that you've noticed tend to work particularly well in certain places?
Gosh, well, I have to say, merch is a tricky one for me. I mean, certainly we get promotional items to send out merch-wise from, you know, in terms like a sort of a gift from an artist around the promotion of an album. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. I'm certainly working with U2. We had a piece of the Berlin Wall around the Achtung Baby album. I've actually got a disco ball in my cupboard somewhere, which was from the Pop Mart tour. I guess merchandise that kind of relates to the tour, as obviously the disco ball did with Pop Mart. You caught me on the hop here. I can't think of any other. It was
more certain types of merch that work well, or, you know, if you, Adam, on your travels, have you gone to a show and just been like, my God, you know, they're selling sort of band onesies and they're flying off the shelf, or Peter, you know, are there any things that you've noticed in certain countries?
Yeah, I worked with Rammstein for many years. And of course, they have this dildo kit with costs of their own. Yeah. And that, of course, can sometimes go into the country, sometimes not. So each country was different. So that truck was always stopped. So we couldn't have anything else in that truck. If you have other equipment, that truck might be stopped at the border. So we have to be more or less. So you have a truck just going around with the dildo merch, which was, of course, then all the fans was asking about them, and of course it was sold the most. But that's because it was forbidden in certain areas where we came. And same with the gas mask that they had. The gas mask couldn't. I don't know why, but the gas mask was not allowed.
I can't imagine going over the border with a bunch of dildos. I mean, I remember going over the border with a band where we had cases of skulls and bones that were stage props. They were thrown into the crowd during the show, and every border agent would go through that, and every single box, because they were just concerned, that something was amiss. Of course, there wasn't, but I can only imagine, like, dildos is like next level.
The worst level is I know the worst level. I worked with a Norwegian black metal band.
Yeah.
And my job on each show was to go to the local butcher to get like pig's heart, pig's brain, so they can smash themselves up. So when you had to go to the toilet, the band actually told us, like, yeah, we're gonna set up for the show, so use the toilet before, because after that they have been there. It was like a bloodbath, and they were going on stage. It was Mayhem, and the name was the band is Mayhem. And yeah, so don't use flesh. That's not, or pig's meat and stuff like that. That is really hard to get in some places, especially in the middle of the night.
I think as well, just touching on your points before, if you have got merch that is gonna, let's say, arouse the suspicion of customs agents, then yeah, like you say, make sure it's not going to hold up your tour or your touring party, and have it separately. I mean, unfortunately, Lindsey's just had to leave, which is a great shame, because I thought she was going to be here for the duration. But it would be good to ask her about some of these touring things. But I thought, we're getting a couple of things that I wanted to go back to. One of them being these I suppose national sensitivities. I mean, if you're touring the UK and you're in Scotland, then saying, "Hello England" is not going to go down particularly well. And I've had this with my other life as a tourist guide, taking German pensioners around Scotland. They just found it impossible to relate to the fact that Scotland was Scotland, England was England, and they were both part of the UK or Great Britain. And I would say to them, look, if you're in Berlin, you're not in Bavaria. So, you don't go to Munich and say, I'm in Brandenburg, but you're both are in Germany. And it's, I think those sorts of things can, in Spain or in the, obviously with Catalonia and the Basque Country in particular, those things can be sensitive issues. Have you encountered any of that kind of thing yourselves? And, what's your, how do you ensure that those sorts of things don't happen?
I mean, working with someone local to tell you right ahead of time, I mean, you've just got to, you can't think that you know everything. You've got to have a local partner in each territory that can kind of help you navigate that. One of my best friends does a lot of shows in Asia. He works at AAG now for all of Australasia, but at the time he was just doing shows himself in China. And, we were doing shows, bringing bands over there, and he would always kind of sit me down and tell me the do's and don'ts with each act. And, and even when you do that, you still have problems. He brought Bjork over and, to do shows in China, and she says, free Tibet during her show. Obviously that caused a lot of problems. We had a band that we were bringing over, and they were called Star 64, and, very safe pop band, this was 20 years ago, and US band, very clean cut. And their permits to play in China were revoked, and we couldn't understand why, because they were the most, Wonder Bread type of act out there. And we find out later it's because 6/4 is the anniversary of Tiananmen Square, which, according to China, officially never happened, right? So we had to, of course, being a bullshit artist, I just quickly lied and said, "Oh, that's not the application. You can't read my writing. It's it's 6ix9ine, 6ix9ine, and we changed everything to 6ix9ine, and the band got in. And I then had to have a conversation with the band saying, I just changed your band name. But anyway, these are things that you don't normally think about, but you've got to have someone local in the market to help you navigate that.
We're kind of running out of time, so I think that there's one thing, and you touch on it here, Adam, is ask someone local. But what is your approach? And what are each of your approaches? What advice would you give to trying, in terms of trying to preempt any problems and just getting an insight into local sensitivities? Have you got go-to guides on this? Are there any blogs? Are there any books? Or do you always just ask people that have been to a place or that are local?
Well, I would reiterate what Adam said. Definitely a local contact is by far the best, really. And certainly, whenever I've been working with an artist that's not from the UK, then I've asked the management. I've asked somebody local from the record company. Interesting that you referred to the band from China, actually, because I worked in a band called Retros that came over to the UK, and they had established themselves in quite a left field way in China. But we had to be quite careful of the language we used promotionally here. Like, for example, you might say a band were anti-establishment because that makes them sound quite cool and edgy. But that wasn't something we could use because, politically, it wasn't wise from their point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I had another band rejected for permits in China just because of their look. They looked too edgy, and it scared the authorities. The guy had long extensions, purple hair, this and that. It scared them. The person at the consulate was like, "Yeah, all the other band members are approved. I can't accept this one." Basically tell him to cut his hair, wear a hat, do something, cover this up, because I'm not putting my name on this application.
Mm-hmm.
We had bands actually covering tattoos, like makeover tattoos in Asia in some certain places, just because because if you have a tattoo, you might be a gang member and stuff like that. So, same with Taiwan. You can't be saying, China says Taiwan is us, and Taiwan says no, we are not a part of China. So where are you? So most of the time, we just say to the bands, don't be political, because
yeah, I mean, Katy Perry did a show where she had a dress on with a sun on it, right? And that looked like the flag of the Free Taiwan movement or something. So then now Katy Perry's got a problem in China because she wore that dress in Taiwan, and it had nothing to do with that movement. It just was a dress with a sunrise on it. Now you get a big international problem.
On the subject of that, I mean, of China. I mean, there's an excellent bit in Simon Napier Bell's book about how he took Wham into China, and the Queen were actually They found out that Queen were in the running to go to China, and that there were advanced discussions. So he made up this kind of portfolio. Simon's gay, as obviously was George Michael, but he made up this portfolio about Queen and basically got that circulated so that, and presented Wham as these two sort of super clean cut young men, and basically got Queen taken out of the sort of consideration, and made sure that Wham were the first ones into China. But it was a perfect example of like very sort of Machiavellian thinking, but also understanding how the Chinese system worked. I mean, this is before any Western bands had played there, in order to manipulate it. It's an excellent book, by the way, as well. All his books are excellent. So if there was one last piece of advice that you could think of, or that you would give, what would it be?
Well, from my point of view, I mean, obviously I'm working with bands primarily that are coming to the UK. And as a result, managing expectations, giving them a better idea of UK media in general, the fact that they are probably not going to be able to be, expect media coverage on the level that they might have in their own territory. A as I say, encouraging them to put some perhaps social posts up in English, maybe engaging a UK audience. Yeah.
Adam?
For an overseas artist coming to the US, all of those same things really apply. The US is huge. It takes time. It's going to be a long, slow slog. It's going to be expensive. You got to put the time in, right? For artists that are going from the US, going to overseas, or, a UK act, or, going to another country, remember that these are other, just because it's another country, it's still a great market. It's not the poor Africa, like Peter mentioned, right? Like it's, in a way, these countries actually have an amazing foot up because they didn't have the industry before, and now they have the industry. So yeah, like Peter said, everything's brand new. Some of the best PAs and sound systems and equipment I've worked with, with artists when touring, have been in China and India, because it's all brand new. The music business is new there. So, remember that, you're not the best just because you're from the UK and you're big there, and you're not the best just because you're from the US and there's lots of bands that are big in other markets, and they're perfectly happy in those markets and doing well, right? And so you've got to have a worldview on that side as well. Peter,
the last word from yourself.
It's be adaptable, more or less. Like when you encounter the problems, you have to adapt to them. And it's not that you can just stand there screaming, I'm the artist, I'm doing this and I'm doing that. It depending on, sometimes you can, but you have also been like, okay, in this show we just have to do it because it will make more trouble than, so adapt to it and don't be just stubborn, and be adapting into it. And yeah, I had my bands playing in a crocodile suit just because they had to, and they still hate me for it though. But we managed to get it going just because of it.
Well, thanks very much to all three of you and Lindsey, who joined us earlier. It's been a great chat. I've been delighted to jump in at the last minute to chair it.